Good afternoon, everyone. Patrick here with Underdog Dueling here with Solo YUGIOH, bringing you the second of three Egyptian God deck profiles. Today we are looking at Kaiba's ace monster, Obelisk the Tormentor. So the main point of this strategy is to tribute as much as possible to clear the board and potentially burn your opponent out of the game. But what can we do to help this out? Simple. We mix it in with a deck that loves to tribute itself, and today we're looking at Lair of Darkness with Obelisk. Let's go ahead and get started, and if you want to see more, like and subscribe to Solo YUGIOH, and you can check me out at Underdog Dueling on YouTube or on Twitter at Soren's Lair. Even though I haven't uploaded anything in quite a while, I'm slowly working on it. Anyway, let's get started. So starting off, I am only playing 2 copies of Obelisk the Tormentor. I kind of switch between 2 and 3. It just really depends on kind of the build that I want to do, because the side deck does kind of get swapped out quite a bit. So like all the other God cards, it requires 3 tributes to tribute summon. Its summon cannot be negated in any way, and no cards can be activated in response to its summon. So once the god is on the field, it has to stay. Similarly to Slifer, if it is special summoned, it is sent to the graveyard at the end of the turn. And then Obelisk has the ability to where you can tribute 2 monsters on the field to destroy all monsters your opponent controls. However, it cannot declare an attack the turn this is activated, but this still gives you a chance to blow up the board and ensure that your opponent has to kind of work a little bit to be able to get their board back. We're then running 3 copies of Reactor Slime. During the main phase, you can special summon 2 slime tokens, but you can't summon other monsters for the rest of the turn except Divine Beasts. This is basically to use with some of our other support to get Obelisk out on the field as soon as possible. And then during the battle phase, during either player's battle phase, you can tribute this card to set 1 copy of Metal Reflect Slime from hand, deck, or graveyard, and it can be activated this turn. Basically because this card is going to be sitting in attack mode. During your opponent's turn, if you are going first, this gives you kind of an insurance policy where you can get a trap monster set on the field to protect your life points. We're then running 3 copies of Telius the Little Angel. If this card is sent from the monster zone to the graveyard, you can special summon a Telius Wing token, which is a level 1 light fairy monster. And while you control a Telius token, you can banish this card from your graveyard and 1 spell from your hand, and special summon 2 more Telius tokens, but your opponent can't special summon for the rest of this turn, or you can't special summon for the rest of this turn, except from your hand. So if you're able to get a quick special summon off, it has to be from the hand. Otherwise, this is also kind of used to get your tokens on the field to be able to summon out Obelisk as soon as possible. Then for the actual Lair of Darkness portion of the strategy, this is only a partial one. The extra deck, the side deck rather, has more of them. So we're just kind of playing a small Lair of Darkness engine just to kind of help with the tribute aspects. Starting with 3 copies of Arma the Wicked Warden. This is our main searcher. It can be discarded to add 1 copy of the Lair of Darkness field spell from deck to hand. And then you can tribute any dark monster to draw a card, but if you tributed a dark monster other than himself, you can add a dark monster with 2,000 or more defense from your deck to your hand instead. This is a good way. This helps get our plays going and help get Lair of Darkness on the field. And then if we can tribute either one of our opponent's monsters or 1 other dark monster, we can add the next card, like our copy of Darkest Diablos, Lord of the Lair. So your opponent cannot tribute this card on the field, and it cannot be targeted with card effects. If a dark monster is tributed, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your graveyard or from your hand, but it has to be a monster you control, so you can't use Lair of Darkness shenanigans to tribute your opponent's monster to summon it out. But you can tribute any dark monster on the field, and your opponent places a card from their hand in either the top or bottom of the deck, effectively either getting a card straight onto the bottom, which thins their hand a little, or it places it on top so they're forced to draw into that card. This kind of makes up the backbone of the strategy, but like I said, we do run the other Lair of Darkness cards, which I will show here shortly. We then run a small Bestial package, just for some extra utility, running 1 Bestial Magnemite, 2 Bestial Druisworm, and 2 Bestial Baldrake. So Magnemite, during the end phase, can add any dragon from deck to hand. Bestial Druisworm can send a monster that was special summoned from the field to the graveyard. When this card is sent to the graveyard, Bestial Baldrake can tribute one other light or dark monster to target a special summon monster that was summoned from the extra deck or is a ritual summon monster, and can banish it. All the Bestials have the effect where you can target a light or dark monster in either player's graveyard, banish them to special summon these cards. Basically, as long as you have kind of a graveyard setup, you've got free fodder for summoning. This is really just to kind of help move the strategy along, and does get monsters on board if you want to go into some level 6s. But they also count as dark dragons and generally have 2,000 or more defense. They all have 2,000 more defense, which means they can be searched off of Arma. And then the last main monster that we run is Tiny Spirit Vashuda at 2 copies. If you control no effect monsters, you can special summon this card from the hand. And if you control a non-effect monster like a token, you can banish this card from hand or grave, target a card your opponent controls, and return it to the hand. This can also be searched off of Arma, and it is just more of a 2,500 beater, but it can go and be used for link climbing if need be. Since we do work with a lot of tokens, this is just a good card to have in hand or in the grave to be able to try and disrupt your opponent's plays. Next, moving on to the spells, I'm running 3 copies of Lair of Darkness. As mentioned earlier, Lair of Darkness makes to where all monsters on the field become dark, and if you attribute a monster to activate the effect and a card or effect, you can attribute a dark monster your opponent controls instead, even if you don't control it. However, and this is a soft once per turn, so if you end up activating another copy of this, you can attribute another monster. And then during the end phase, this special summons a number of torment tokens as possible to the turn player's field, up to the number of monsters attributed this turn when this card was face up. If it is your turn and you tribute 2 monsters, for example, no matter from either side, whether mine, or your opponent's, this will summon out 2 tokens straight away to allow you for potentially your Vashuda plays or be able to summon out your Obelisk. Then, similarly with the Slifer profile, running 3 copies of Soul Crossing to tribute your opponent's monsters to summon out a Divine Beast, though again you can only activate 1 more card or effect per turn until the end of the next turn, except those of Divine Beasts. Then for an Obelisk-specific support, we have 3 copies of Breaking Ruin God. Like the other support, this card's effects cannot be negated, and the activation cannot be negated. It'll special summon an Obelisk from hand or grave, and it makes it unaffected by your opponent's card effects for the rest of the turn. And then if you tribute 2 or more monsters you control at the same time to activate a card or effect while you control Obelisk, you can banish this card from your graveyard to banish all monsters your opponent controls, and burn them for 500 for each monster. So if you're able to use something like, if you're able to get Obelisk out on the field, activate Breaking Ruin God, then use Soul Crossing to tribute your opponent's monsters. You can then summon, let's see if you tribute 2 or more, oh, you control at the same time, never mind on that. So I lied, but if you contribute 2 monsters, like using our tokens, you can banish this card from your graveyard immediately to banish all monsters your opponent controls, and then go ahead and burn them for 500. If they have 8 monsters in their grave, that is 4,000 points of damage already, cutting out a huge chunk of their life points. We then run 3 copies of Foolish Burial Goods. We can go ahead and use this to send a spell or trap from deck to grave. Ideally, we're going to use this to send a Breaking Ruin God if we already have an Obelisk on the field, so that way we can get its banish effect. Otherwise, we can use this to send our 2 copies of Soul Energy Max, which is our other Obelisk support. Let's go ahead and move that down a little. If you control Obelisk the Tormentor, whose original attribute is Divine, you can tribute 2 other face-up monsters, destroy as many monsters your opponent controls as possible, and burn your opponent for 4,000. And then during the main or the battle phase, you can manage this card, add an Obelisk the Tormentor from deck to hand, and then immediately normal summon Obelisk. Basically, you can also get this, if you already have like your tokens on board or your plays set up and you draw into Foolish Burial Goods, you can go and use this to send Soul Energy Max, banish it to immediately grab your copy of Obelisk the Tormentor to summon it straight out to the field. And of course, if you have, if you go and burn your opponent for 4,000 and you have Breaking Ruin God in the grave, and your opponent has 8 or more monsters, you can burn the rest of their life points. So if you're lucky and you have the right setup and your opponent combos a lot and you're going second and you have a way to do it, you can OTK your opponent just through a lot of burn damage. Then lastly, we are running 3 copies of Super Polymerization. This allows us to fuse monsters from either side by discarding a card, and neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. There are a couple of fusion monsters that are generic that work very well with Super Poly, but I do not currently have them at the time, looking to get them at some point. But this is just a really good way to go about clearing some of your opponent's board. With Lair of Darkness, turning everything dark, we can get some ridiculously powerful monsters from the extra deck straight onto the field. Then I run 1 copy of Fist of Fate. Similarly to Breaking Ruin God, it can't be negated in any way. If you control an Obelisk the Tormentor, you negate the effects of 1 monster your opponent controls. If you do, destroy it, and then your opponent cannot activate any the effects of that monster or any monsters of the same original name. And then if you activate it during your main phase, you can destroy all spell and traps your opponent controls. We are only running this at 1 because it can be a little bricky in the hand if you can't get Obelisk out on the field, though you could also consider running this at 2, similarly to Thunder Force Attack. And then lastly, we have 2 copies of Egyptian God Slime, which special summons a level 10 Aqua token monster with 0 attack and 3000 defense, but it can't attack. We're mostly using this off of Reactor Slime, but this also helps us transition into our extra deck because it is a level 10 Aqua monster with 0 attack. We can use this to summon out Egyptian God Slime, of which I run 2 copies. I might bring the Metal Reflect Slimes back up to 3, but we shall have to see. So this card must first either be fusion summoned or special summoned by attributing a level 10 Aqua with 0 attack. It can be treated as 1 or 3 tributes for the tribute of any monster. It cannot be destroyed by battle. Your opponent cannot target any other cards for attacks or by card effects except for Egyptian God Slime. This gives you a really good body and is easy to summon off to allow for your setup of Obelisk the Tormentor, on top of it being just a 3k body to help even though it can't, to help swing over monsters or be able to act as a wall for a short time. We then also run for Super Poly purposes. We are running a small Predaplant fusion package, starting with 1 Trifio Veritum, 2 Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, and 1 Dragostapella. So all of these typically are fairly generic with super polymerization. Trifio Veritum can use 3 dark monsters that are on the field. Starving Venom can use 2 dark monsters on the field except for tokens. And then Dragostapella can be any fusion monster and 1 dark monster. Dragostapella makes it to where you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls and place a predator counter on it. And as long as it becomes level 1 and it negates the activated effects of those monsters that have predator counters as a quick effect, Starving Venom can take on the attack of a level 5 or higher special summon monster, and it gains attack equal to it, then can target a monster to copy its name and original effect, and when destroyed, it destroys all of your opponent's special summon monsters. Then finally, Trifio Veritum gains attack equal to the total number of all other monsters with predator counters. When your opponent would special summon a monster from the extra deck while you control this card, you can negate the activation and destroy the monster. And then if your opponent controls a monster with a predator counter, you can summon this card from your graveyard in defense position. We then run 2 copies of Mud Dragon of the Swamp, which, when using Super Polymerization, you can use 2 monsters with the same attribute but different types. You cannot target this card or monsters on the field with the same attribute as this card with card effects, and once per turn you can declare an attribute and this monster becomes that attribute until the end of the turn, giving you a little bit of extra protection. So if you have Lair of Darkness out, this card will become Dark Attribute, which will prevent other dark attributes, other dark monsters from being targeted by card effects. Then finally, for just some generic support, I run 1 Salamangreat Almirage, which requires a normal monster with 1000 or less attack. Use this with Teleus the Little Angel on the normal summon to be able to get its summon of a token, as well as provide some protection from card effects, and then being able to special summon this card from the grave if a normal monster gets destroyed. Then finally, we have a small copy, trio of Nightmare packages. Phoenix allows you to discard a card to destroy a spell or trap. Cerberus can destroy a special summon monster your opponent controls. And Nightmare Unicorn can spin a card back into the deck, all by discarding one card. And that is all for this deck profile. I do hope you enjoyed it. I do have the side deck here, but it's mostly just 3 copies of Droll Knockbird to stop our opponent from adding cards, infinite impermanence, and negate monster effects. 3 Lilith, Lady of Lament, to grab any normal trap, namely our copies of Viruses to dismantle our opponent's plays, and then 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance if you really hate spells. But thanks so much for watching, and next up we are going to be looking at the Winged Dragon of Ra. Thank you much, and take care.